in some senses, I feel like I've solved the world's problems 10 times over. But it's like a dream, right? You know, by the time you're done, you've forgotten everything you thought of on the ride.
Welcome to the Canadian Cycling Magazine podcast. I'm Matthew Pioro, editor of the magazine and your host. You just heard a pretty far-out quote from Rob Britton. He was discussing bikepacking and what might go on in your head when you ride long distances. Britton is a top Canadian climber and time trialist on Rally Pro Cycling. In 2017, he won the Tour of Utah. The next year, he started bikepacking. He spoke about that first foray on this podcast in late 2018. Since then, Britton has continued to have some long adventures on his bike, including a big trip to Japan in November 2019. In this episode, Britton and I covered all kinds of topics related to bikepacking. The pro rider shares tales from his rides. He talks about how he sometimes pushes himself and his friends. He's very safety conscious and even has some good advice about when and how to take risks. And we really get into gear. He puts a lot of thought into every gram of every piece of equipment, including what goes in his flask. I know that after you hear this interview with Rob Britton, you want to plan a big cycling adventure. I know I do. Rob Britton, during the past 2 years, you've done some pretty cool rides with frame bags attached to your bikes. You spoke on this podcast in late 2018 about bikepacking. To return to that year, what sparked your interest in bikepacking in 2018? I understand you were actually a bit dismissive about it for a while, but what changed your mind exactly?
Yeah, I don't know if there was a specific thing. I wouldn't say I went researching about it initially. I think I just woke up one day with this idea that it would be cool to do a trip to go from my house in Calgary to my old home in Victoria, British Columbia. And, you know, it's a pretty epically beautiful backdrop through the Rocky Mountains and then the coastal mountains onto the West Coast. Right about then, there was, I think, literally within a day or two, GCN had released kind of this like introduction guide to bikepacking. And again, like you say, I kind of made fun of these people before, you know, long distance riders, randonneurs or what have you. And yeah, something flicked inside my head, and I've done a fair number of like adventurous rides on bikes that maybe weren't designed for the course or using the right tool for the job. But yeah, I decided to do this, and I had some friends who were pretty on board with the idea, and that's how it started. We actually were just talking about it this last weekend, how none of us had any experience when we sort of rolled out of our house in Calgary and just sort of made this 2-week trip happen. So that's pretty rad.
I remember, you talking about that a bit on our podcast, and you, I believe, were actually a bit nervous before that first bikepacking ride in 2018 as you left Calgary. Why were you nervous?
I mean, up until then, and even now, I do get nervous when I start out, although I'm a bit more comfortable at it. It's rare for me to go into a ride that has like an unknown endpoint, or specifically a point-to-point. You know, when you leave your house, for the majority of people, you're coming back to sleep in your bed that night. Or, you know, if you're racing, you're sleeping in a different hotel or what have you. With this, we left the house and you're not coming back. And for me, you know, I wasn't coming back for a really long time because I was going to, on that first trip, I was going all the way out to the coast and then from there over to Austria for Worlds and then back. And a lot of this terrain, like, well, I'd planned it. This is kind of my first bikepacking trip that I'd put together. So I didn't know. There's a lot of unknowns. There's stuff I like, you know, planned for, but you can only plan so much when you've never done something. So it was a bit daunting. You know, I hadn't really slept in a tent for like years. I set it up once prior to this just to make sure I knew how to do it. But for the most part, there was a lot of new things happening very quickly. Yeah, you realize it's just like what you have on your bike is kind of what you have. There's not really a lot of like options to pick stuff up, you know, here and there, maybe food, but that's about it all on the way. So if you don't have a jacket or you didn't bring enough like tools or socks or these kind of things, you're kind of on your own.
Since then, you've done a few bikepacking rides. Has there ever been a piece of gear that you've forgotten that, you really suffered because of its absence?
No. No, I've never...
I guess that's a good thing.
Yeah, definitely a good thing. Maybe the closest I've come to it would be I should have washed / fluffed my sleeping bag before doing a couple trips. When down sleeping bags get dirty or packed out, the baffles have less loft to them, so then they kind of don't keep you warm. Yeah, it's not so great to be wearing everything you have in every piece of clothing you have to try to stay warm and still cold because your sleeping bag doesn't have any loft. So that'd probably be one thing I'll remember for future trips, especially to places in the fall where they're going to be cold. I have a list that I pretty much stick to year round now. I'd rather have something and not need it than the other way around, just to save a bit of weight.
I definitely want to get into your list and your tips for packing a little later on. But before that, I'm going to bring up 3 things: fun, professionalism, and being a bit evil. Now, all of these in my mind tie together with you and bikepacking. So let me just unpack that a bit. When you did that 2018 trip, it was a 9-day trip from Calgary to Port Renfrew, you called it a massive block of fun on our podcast. And in my mind, that trip is also a bit legendary because it did help you prepare for the World Championships that year, where you were in a massive breakaway all day. So your training became fun. Yet, I know you take training very seriously, and people who ride and work with you always note your professionalism. And on top of that, I know you can be a bit evil. And the example I have is your former Smart Stop teammate and current colleague at Rally Pro Cycling, Zach Bell, says that you can feed off of other people's suffering. I'm quoting him. He even said that the volume you two did in early 2015 ultimately ruined his final season. So tell me about all those elements: fun, professionalism, and being a bit evil in relation to bikepacking.
Yeah, those are pretty accurate. Yeah, I do like making my friends suffer, but I also like to see them get the best of themselves. And a lot of times they end up kind of pushing their own limits because for one reason or another, I've decided to push mine. And we both all kind of get to a place that maybe we might not have achieved otherwise. But yeah, all of my friends, none of them really are professional. So with the exception of a small few, the non-professional ones will go bikepacking with me, and the pro ones, say maybe Nigel will go bikepacking with me.
That's Nigel Elsay, your teammate?
Yes, exactly. I have this balance of people who they're fit, but they're not professional, but they have the sense of adventure to do these things. I like going out on these trips and these tours because they're unique and a ton of fun. But I do take it, once I kind of put my mind to doing it, I think most of them, they trust me now to not make too many errors, and I usually don't. But also, I take it pretty seriously with planning all of that stuff. Just like any training block or any other part of the sport I take seriously. In that sense, I guess it's pretty professional. Because if you're going to be out there, you don't really want to be bushwhacking. And I have for sure made those mistakes where you're just slogging through the bush. But from each one of those mistakes, usually they've been pretty close to home. Ignorance or arrogance kind of clouded my judgment. Something it would have been decisions I never would have made further away from home. I would have stopped and thought about it, but because I was close to home, gotten in a bit of a jam up before. But yeah, every once in a while, I think if you ask my closest friends, I'll throw in the occasional tempo effort up something like the Duffy Lake climb out of Lillooet towards Pemberton. I think I nearly lost 2 of my best friends that day, but we're closer now for it. But that's definitely, and it's just fun beating up on your friends. Everyone loves to do it, kind of. Maybe I'd just like to, but yeah, it's Zach's right. I wouldn't say I ruined his season. He just should have tried to keep up harder, or maybe not as hard. I don't know.
I don't want to stoke old rivalries or anything, but I know you guys are friends and rib each other a lot. But I want to touch on that. idea of pushing yourself and maybe making mistakes and maybe doing sillier things close to home and being on better behavior when, you're more remote. Do you allow yourself, I guess you do allow yourself to push yourself and bushwhack when you know there's less on the line?
For sure. The stuff close to home, I usually know the terrain, like especially now, after the last few years of moving back to Victoria. I know the terrain very well. A lot of the roads I've ridden one direction or another, and if I haven't ridden those roads, I'll know kind of the ones on either side of them and just maybe not over the ridge. I'm more comfortable making mistakes here because, you're only a day away from home, 2 days away from home, depending on like how far away you've gotten. So, and a lot of times you're not that far from a major road. And again, all the stuff I kind of know, it's like, worst case scenario with bikepacking, you can't always have your house with you. So if you do get into a bit of a jam up, you can kind of post up a house. And I rarely do it by myself. I would definitely never do the bushwhacking stuff alone, even close to home, unless I was very certain of its outcome. Further away from home, there's definitely, like when we were in Japan last year, there was definitely times we rode down roads that said they were clearly closed, but I was quite confident that we could get through, and we could, except one day we couldn't. The road was fully washed away from one of the rainstorms, and we were kind of presented with this option of like, well, we could kind of walk the bikes along this like lip that was left of the road that had fully washed away. When I say lip, I mean something that's about as wide as your shoulders, with like 100-foot drop to the side, and I was pretty happy with the choice to not do that. As like much more confident to just like ride around. Like I'd added like 20 or 30K to the day, but it was better than falling off a cliff and dying. So yeah, my radar for making questionable choices is definitely a lot more fine-tuned, especially the further away from home I get.
Tell me about the psychology of riding for a long, long time. What are some of the things that go through your head, or what kind of headspace should you be in if you're riding for hours and hours and hours?
You kind of go through it all. I mean, in some senses, I feel like I've solved the world's problems 10 times over, but it's like a dream, right? By the time you're done, you've forgotten everything you thought of on the ride. Sometimes you're just taking it in, You're in these places that you may never be in again in your life. So you just try to enjoy that moment and really be present in that moment. If I'm riding with friends, we just chat, like bullshit about this, that, and the other. Like what you do a normal ride, just you do it for 8 or 9 hours every day for a week. And then other days you're tired. You're tired and it's windy or rainy and you're just trying to get from point A to point B. And you just literally kind of check out and you're just sort of trying to go through the motions like any hard training day in that sense. You're just trying to get it done because you have to. Like that's kind of also the ultimate thing with bikepacking, especially if you're kind of on a bit of a schedule. You can't really just give up or like, all right, whatever, because you kind of have to get to where you're going. So, I mean, at a certain point, you just like give into that and just stay on it. But yeah, it's great. Like you have lots of time to think. So, I mean, that's why I like just long riding in general. And that's a big part of my training too. It's just kind of therapeutic at the end of the day.
You mentioned in late 2019, you did a big trip in Japan. How does getting to another country change how you prepare for a large bikepacking trip?
That one was, that was a tough one to plan. I started planning that, and I've planned a fair few like routes. It's just something I'm very comfortable doing. But this was some next level stuff because I had to start putting together train routes from where we want to go to where we want to start, where we could fly into, time of year, working out like what the weather's like there, highs and lows, how much daylight you have, what's camping like, can you wild camp, what's the terrain like, is it super hilly or not, like tons of gravel or not, like what kind of tires do you want to use, gearing. Yeah, you start to just sort of start ticking boxes off real quick. At the end of the day, it's still like you kind of wrap your head around where you want to start and where you want to finish, figure out the distance that is. So kind of chalk that in roughly, and then start working around those distances to find campsites a lot of the time. Start fine-tuning the route. And then for Japan, I linked up with just like the cycling world, right? It's so connected. Pete Lapinto, he's a North American rep for Rafa in Boulder, and I just always like going there for coffee and stuff, hang out when I was down there for like all the training I do. And he put me in connection with his Rafa buddy in Tokyo, or just outside of Tokyo, which then he connected me with his buddies like around the different regions I was going to be riding through, because I kind of sent my routes to him for like the best way to get beta on something like this is to just ask a local. Like if someone wanted to ride the island and figure out a bikepacking trip here, like I'd hope someone would point them towards me, or at least they'd look at my routes. Like I can help them out, because this is how I was able to like put Japan together. We would have been super screwed one day on day 2 in Japan. It was 265K or something, like 5,000 meters of climbing. This is bikepacking gear too, so it's a bit different than like, 5,000 meters on the road, which is already hard. So, day 2 with jet lag, we're just like getting stuck into it right away, like 20K. And they're big climbs. This isn't undulating all day. It's like 20, 30K long climbs, big mountain passes. So, and we would have been super screwed if we hadn't have done like a quick check with, my boys in Tokushima. They hooked it up, set up the route, and then like literally routed us past their bike shop. So like 10 o'clock or 10:30 at night, and we were just smashed. We were riding by their shop, and we just saw the Golden Arches McDonald's. Like, let's go to McDonald's. Like, I'm cracked. Like, we'll camp in a park, whatever. Like, we're in the city we needed to be in to catch the ferry the next day, but they were there, and they like hooting and hollering at us. They even brought their like one buddy from the shop who speaks English to like translate essentially. And they spoke some broken English, which was pretty cool. And they just took us out for like sushi. Ironically, the only time we had sushi that whole trip. So we went for a big sushi dinner, and then they rode us this like wicked campsite on the ocean, or like the sea. And then, that was like just a perfect example of how it all kind of got planned. I try to figure out as much stuff as I can, and then nothing beats local knowledge. So once you get your ideas, like fact check them like crazy with locals.
You also put a lot of diligence into your gear and your packing. And you've shared your full gear list with us on the Canadian Cycling Magazine website. I'll put that link in the show notes. But let's talk about some of the specifics. And I feel this one is a very Japan-centric one. What is a Rinko bag?
So a Rinko bag is basically, for lack of a better term, like a bike condom. Like you can take a bike anywhere in Japan, you just can't have it exposed. Like the nation is very, very clean, which is amazing. And like, you got to get these Rinko bags, put them over top of your bike. So wheels off, you have the seat on. It's a bit more complicated with bags just because you have to pull your like seat bag off and my bar bag off and stuff like this. But essentially you take the wheels off, pull the bike up, tie the wheels to the frame, and then whip the condom over top, seat sticks out. You sort of drawstring the bottom so the chain's not out, and then you can take it pretty much anywhere you want. So it's a bit complicated, like I say, with your gear, because you have to hold on to that as well. And some of the trains are very, very crowded. But all in all, it's pretty badass like way to do it. And I'm glad I kept it. I actually had to use it for we were staying in an apartment in Vancouver for a month in March, and they didn't allow bikes in the building. But if I like wrapped it up, taking the elevator, no problem. So I was doing that kind of Japanese style twice a day, every day for a month.
You also carry a tent. Why a tent instead of a bivy bag? And can you describe your tent?
Funnily enough, I actually just ordered we were sponsored by Outdoor Research this year. And I just ordered a bivy sack just to try it out. Biggest thing, honestly, is my tent with the poles weighs about 900 and change grams. And the lightest, like one of the lighter baby sacks you can get that still actually has some like weather protection and also like a bit of like a lift over your head. Like I couldn't do the full on coffin thing, is like about 400 grams. And it's not just in the size, but it's also in the packability. A baby sack won't necessarily pack down significantly smaller than what my tent does. And if you hit inclement weather and it's just pissing down on you, like, then setting up a tent in the rain sucks. But like when you're basically inside of your baby sack, realizing like the second you get out of that, you are soaked. Like it's not a very comforting feature. It's not as warm as a tent, like especially like if there's frost at night, you have a much bigger like area to move around in. It's nice to be able to move your gear around inside of a tent, especially when it's wet. Because I'd say it's weather dependent is the biggest thing with the bivy. If you have nice dry days and, not a lot of dew at night, bivy stack's great, I think. I'm curious to try it out. When you start to look at other ways to have weather prevention, you start looking at things like a ground sheet and a tarp to keep you dry. And essentially you're just carrying a tent with you with less enclosed space. That's probably at the end of the day why I don't go all in with the bivy. Just having a tent it's just more spacious, right? It's like having a 1-bedroom condo or a house.
You carry a flask. What's in the flask?
It goes back and forth. Either I have nice bourbon like Basil Hayden or cheap Jim Beam whiskey. They both go nicely either on their own or with Bengal spice tea.
Ah. Now, do you choose the bourbon based on the trip, or is it just what's available in your liquor cabinet?
We always have bourbon. We don't always have Jim Beam. Honestly, it's just I had bourbon in it, and then I ran out of that. So then I filled it up with Jim Beam, and that's kind of, I guess, the next I'll probably maybe go back to bourbon. I don't drink a ton of these trips. Usually we try to find, a beer or something like that. But on those chilly nights, it's nice to just have something to quote unquote warm you up right before you go to sleep. And sometimes, finding a can of beer in the middle of nowhere isn't so easy, but having a flask is always kind of a nice little thing to have. Is there anything you feel is extravagant in your gear or in your outfit? I'd say probably my jackets. I have a few Gore shake dry jackets that are pretty flash. They're not cheap, but it's they pack up to the size of, your fist basically, or they fit inside any pocket, fit anywhere. Fully waterproof jackets. They go over top of my down if I need to. I usually just take one. Yeah, I can use it as a cycling jacket or just a shell at night. Keeps you warmer. So that's probably the flashiest thing I have. And then last year we got the our Garmin 1030s, the super big Garmins, and those are pretty slick too. It's nice having a huge screen with every map ever created, and tons of RAM inside of it, so it never freezes, shouldn't freeze. And the battery's massive, so when it's dead, it does take a lot to recharge it, but it also takes a lot to kill it. So if you're not running Bluetooth and power meters and all this, the thing lasts for a week. It's insane. Which when you're navigating, you don't want to carry around an extra 5 pounds of batteries. It's pretty awesome. You also carry a pillow. Is that key? No, definitely not. It's funny. I've been trying to find the most comfortable pillow, and the search continues. I haven't found anything that's small and comfortable. It's you can have one or the other, but you can't have both, it seems. Even my friend who camps a ton, mountaineers and backcountry skis and all these things, I think he's just resorted to stuffing clothes into a stuff sack and just sleeping on that. And at this point, I could honestly do that because you're in the bush. It doesn't really matter. There's plenty of things slide around like crazy. So you just want something, basically a rock with some padding under your head is ideal. What is seat bag sway? That's when your seat bag maybe doesn't go as vertically as it should. It's a bit more horizontal, and it kind of comes out almost like a 90-degree angle from your seat post. The longer it is, the bigger the sway. So when you stand, it kind of wags like a tail and counter throws your bike. So when you're leaning your bike back to the left, it's still kind of snapping to the right. So it's pulling you the opposite direction you kind of want to go, or throwing you too far the direction you're kind of already heading. You figure it out pretty fast. Easiest way is just not stand. You either figure out your pack job, or you just accept that you have sway and try to mitigate it as much as you can. Have you ever thought of going old school and running racks and panniers? Or is it the freedom to put on frame bags and take them off that keeps you in that more modern bikepacking mode? I don't see myself ever using a rack system for the stuff that I do. At the end of the day, I'm definitely still a weight conscious roadie, and the idea of using panniers is very heavy. Even though you can carry more stuff, I also have a pretty specific pack list I use and haven't ever needed much more than that. I just, in my situation in life right now, I don't foresee doing trips longer than maybe 10 days or 2 weeks. In those situations, I don't need more gear, and a pannier system is just a lot more stuff, racks and panniers themselves, front and rear, adds a stiff amount of weight, and getting off road and, getting sendy on single track isn't as much fun with the rack. I don't think they take it quite as well. There's a guy who does it. He's done like damn near all the way around the world with panniers and some pretty crazy stuff too, much crazier than me. But for what I like to do and how I like to do it, I really like just like kind of the new school bikepacking bag style.
When you're going on different surfaces for a ride, or maybe the ride has more gravel or even some single track versus more road, does that change how you load your bike?
No, not entirely. I use a gravel bike for it. The bike's kind of ready for anything. If I think there's going to be gravel at all, I'll run a semi-slick or like semi-knob tire. The setup, other than that, pretty much stays the same. Always wear mountain bike pedals, because then mountain bike shoes, that's kind of like, it's easy to hike around and walking around in. Road shoes sucks. And I'm comfortable riding all terrain, whether it's like full on mountain bike stuff, or it's like you maybe have to hike your bike up because it's so heavy or too steep. I think last year the biggest change I made was just running. I think I ran a 38 mil tubeless slick for the ride, and I had one puncture early on, and it sealed, so no stress there. For the most part, it's always the same kind of adventure bike. I've never done one on the road bike yet.
This past spring, you did a massive 270-kilometer gravel ride on Vancouver Island. You called it the Dirty Triangle. I think you only had a frame bag, a top tube bag, and a small seat bag. What were some of your essentials for just a really, really big day trip?
Yeah, that was sick. That was like all gravel. It was kind of like I connected a bunch of pieces that I had done individually and put them all together into a day, and also made my longest ride ever. So to that point, because that day we wanted to be pretty self-sufficient, we had a water filter, which was pretty handy. Actually didn't end up needing it, but if it would have been today that I went out and did it, I would have needed it for sure. It's definitely way hotter. Essentials is just like, for a big trip, food. It's a big one, especially if there's nowhere to buy stuff. I brought tons of bars. Pockets are pretty full. If it's the West Coast, pretty much any time of the year, you kind of want to have like a packable raincoat. Gloves, good one. My hands get cold sometimes, and I don't really enjoy that. So I had two different jackets, like a semi-thermal jacket and a rain shell, cycling cap. Here I ride with a Garmin InReach Mini, so it's like a little emergency beacon. Other little things that are kind of handy to have, like a Leatherman, just basic Leatherman, kind of gets you out of any jam ups that your multi-tool can't. Chain breaker. This trip, because we were out there, I brought an extra set of, like Nigel and I both ride Shimano brakes, so I brought extra Shimano disc brake pads, cleat bolts, and a master link. So those things you can kind of fix a lot of stuff. And sure enough, Nigel lost a cleat bolt in the ride, so that was handy. Yeah, so I guess those are some essentials. And then usually I ride with front and rear lights now, just on my bike all the time, whether or not they're on, but I have them. And then on this ride, I had an actual proper like front headlight for getting home.
What does bikepacking give you in a sort of psychological or emotional sense?
This is going to sound, I don't know, cliche or, I don't know. That's not how it sounds. It's an escape, honestly.
Why is that important?
It's pretty easy to get, especially right now with the way the world is, it's pretty easy to get wrapped up in a lot of stressful stuff and maybe negativity, and like it can be overwhelming at times, I think, for anyone, and I'm no different than that. But when you go out there, and like I'm just as guilty as the next person, if not worse, with the addiction to your phone, it's pretty sweet to just sort of like bugger off and disappear into the woods for a few days, no service. Just, I take a ton of pictures. That's kind of what I use my phone for when I'm out there. Just because one day I'm not going to remember it as well as I do right now. Just, having that escape from your day-to-day normal or your day-to-day like stresses and stuff. And like, sure enough, like that stuff's going to be waiting for you when you get back, but maybe you have cleared a bit of stuff, like, mental food off your plate, and you're ready to like be back on point. I know when I get back from trips, like as fatiguing as they are, I usually come back pretty refreshed. And I've had that fix of adventure, which I pretty desperately need. And that doesn't seem to be going away even through all of this, I've just been planning routes and ideas and different things because I just love it.
In 2018, you asked Svein Tuft for some bikepacking advice. Now you're someone people turn to with questions. What's one key thing you've learned from your adventures?
First of all, I think anybody can do it. I don't think you necessarily need to travel around the world to do it. I don't think anybody is necessarily geo-restricted. And I don't think fitness is necessarily a big factor, even though a lot of people think it is. I ride long because I can. If you can't, you don't have to ride super far to make your own adventure. To have a good time, definitely you don't want to be cavalier about it. Planning is very important. I don't know, maybe I'm a bit more obsessive than some, but I think you can have a lot better time if you put time in before you go. It allows you to be more relaxed when you know a bit what to expect or the challenges that lie ahead, and you can kind of take some time to prepare for that and be ready for it. So planning for your trip is very important. It's a bit more than just a weekend camping trip where you drive out somewhere and pitch a tent, because the transportation to the campsite is kind of the biggest part. But it's a pretty amazing way to see, your own backyard, whether you live in Saskatchewan or you live in Rocky Mountain House. There's plenty of adventure. We're pretty lucky to live in the country that we do. There's so much to see. I've never even been to the east coast of Canada. A couple of days ago, just for the fun of it, I plotted out a trip from here to Newfoundland just to see all the places I could see, and it was pretty fun. I could stay with friends here, stay here, ever than that. This is a cool thing there. This is where they recommended to ride in this province, all the way across the country. So it's something that can take you places. I guess it's a long-winded answer to say anyone can do it, and be prepared so that you can enjoy the ride.
Rob Britton, thank you very much for your insights into bikepacking.
Yeah, my pleasure. Happy to share.
And that's the episode. It's written and edited by me, Matthew Piaro. I had help from web editors Lily Hanson-Gillis and Terry McCall. The podcast is produced by Adam Killick. He composed the music, too. Thanks to Ontario Creates for its support. And thank you for listening. Please rate and review the show, ride safely, and I'll talk to you later.